SMO's Film Before Live studio audience.
Hi, Steve from Steve M Outdoors, and today I'm going to look at the question of whether the easy and cheap days of military surplus collecting are over. So what prompted this video was watching on someone YouTube the other day discussing military surplus firearms and the prices they were commanding. And his opinion, they were far more expensive than they should be. Levels, in fact, that it made them no longer worthwhile to acquire any longer. One point that he made, which is what caused the creation of this video, was that the days of milsurp collecting was over, and what you owned was what you were going to own going forward. So that got me to thinking, and this is something that I have mulled over repeatedly in the past, is the question: are the easy and cheap days of military surplus collecting over? There are some points in his favor. Prices for a lot of military surplus rifles have risen considerably in recent years. You know, the SVT 40 that I love so much cost me about $300 Canadian. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. A rifle that now commands prices of about $700. And those are just the regular ones, not the rarer versions. Ditto for the AG-42B, which for years you could buy $400 at any gun show or gun store. They're now asking prices of anywhere from $650 to $750 Canadian. Lee Enfields, ditto up here in Canada up until fairly recently, they're about $250 for a decent rifle. Now, you know, it's not surprising to see them listed for sale anywhere from $500 to $800, depending, again, on condition. We all know that guy at the local gun store who moans about the fact that you could buy a particular rifle for only $100 and they'd throw in a pile of surplus ammunition only 10 years ago. A rifle that now, he notes, costs several times as much, and you don't get the ammunition any longer. So what are the arguments in favor of his video? Well, the first one is supply. As with location, when it comes to real estate, supply is a pretty big factor when it comes to military surplus collecting. Let's face it, in some cases, they haven't made the rifles that we tend to collect in decades. The Soviets, for example, cranked out 37 million Mosin Nagants between 1891 and about 1965. That's a lot. Now, let's also remember that millions were lost through, you know, destruction, capture, whatever it may be, in the First and the Second World Wars. Others were exported to satellite countries and used up or destroyed there. And others were just simply lost through attrition. That still leaves millions of them. But at the end of the day, there is a finite supply of these things. And that supply is tied up in a couple of different places. The salt mines of countries like Russia and the Ukraine, where geopolitical reasons aren't going to be freeing them up anytime soon. Import bans, international regulations, and collectors who own them and aren't going to be letting them go anytime soon. So with the supply of military surplus firearms, particularly the ones that everyone wants, available for purchase, dwindling, prices, of course, are going to go up. Related to supply is another reason why there are no more surplus military firearms released by countries to whoever wants them. With essentially every country using select fire rifles these days, firearms aren't being surplused any longer. When a country adopts a new service rifle, the old ones are either being sent as aid to allies, or ending up at the end of a saw blade or being thrown into a furnace. Even if they weren't, international protocols and the laws of most individual nations don't really lend themselves to dumping military rifles out onto the open market for civilians to buy, or allow countries to even import them in the first place. Simply put, no one's broadly using bolt action or semi-automatic rifles, and those are the ones that you typically collect if you collect military surplus firearms. There are no more new firearms to collect. Demand. The opposite of supply and demand, and that has been increasing in recent years as well. There's the Band of Brothers effect, where everyone saw the miniseries and went out and bought an M1 Garand or an M1 carbine. There's the recognition that old military rifles don't necessarily mean garbage. I think a lot of people, perhaps spurred by the gradual passing of the greatest generation, also want a tangible link to the Second World War, and to a lesser extent the First World War. For a lot of people, that means an iconic rifle or a handgun. So you have M1 Garands, which were only a couple $100 a few years ago, now commanding prices in the United States of over $1,000, and up here in Canada, around $2,000. Prices for in-demand and short supply items, whether it's a real short supply or imaginary, tend to go up. So wills the invisible hand of Adam Smith. Next up, suppliers aren't stupid. It used to be, if you listen to the stories, that to pry some old milsurp rifles out of the former Eastern Bloc, you only needed a pickle barrel's worth of vodka, a couple of old Playboy issues, and a couple of bucks. That is certainly part of the reason why some rifles sat for years in stores with price tags less than $100 or $200. That world doesn't exist any longer. A few years ago, I actually happened to read an article by an arms importer of how difficult it was now to bring in surplus firearms from the former Eastern Bloc. These days, there are a bewildering array of regulations that need to be respected. Arranging transport from the storage facility is a pain. Officials have their palms out, and that's just to get the arms to a shipping container for loading on a ship. That has also become far more complicated and expensive in recent years. So it's far more expensive to ship this stuff to North America. And factor in the increasing wiliness of the people who have the stockpiles. They're not stupid. They have the internet too, and they know how much this stuff is commanding in terms of price over here and in demand. So they've priced their wares accordingly, and that makes it even more expensive to bring into the North American market. If your supplier is basically demanding a market price per rifle, that leaves no room for profit for you unless you raise your prices as well. However, all that said, is milsurp collecting actually dead as an activity? There are some days that I think milsurp collecting is a little bit like the Dutch tulip bubble of 1637. Prices for a lot of rifles, particularly the commonly coveted ones, keep going up, but at some point the market is going to collapse and reset itself, especially if some outside influence plays a part. We've actually seen that in recent past up here in Canada. Up here, SKS 45 prices went up for years, and in the 90s they fetched $350, $400 until someone in the Ukraine or Russia decided they needed some sweet Western dough and flooded the market. Not surprisingly, prices collapsed, and that's why we had sub $200 SKS 45s in Canada up until relatively recently. Could that happen again? Although I said earlier that supplies are finite, it's widely rumored that there are still millions of milsurp firearms hanging around long-term storage in various parts of the world. Hell, even the Americans discovered a huge stash of STG-44s in Syria a couple years ago. A rifle that I think most collectors would probably give their eye for, and regularly came across those and other milsurp firearms in Iraq. All it would take is peace in some parts of the world, a loosening of import rules, and we could easily see prices go down quickly. Collecting milsurp could also just be a fad amongst a lot of gun owners, because it was cheap and easy when they started out, and higher prices could turn off a lot of those people or new people who want to come into this market. Those collected arms could eventually be sold off and put pressures on firearms prices to go down. Could. Is the ability to collect milsurp over, though? I don't think so. There's still plenty of deals out there, and if you branch out beyond the usual suspects like Lee Enfields and Garands and Kar 98Ks and SVTs, you can still find a lot of reasonably priced firearms out there. I think the days of really cheap firearms, however, is probably over. Like I said, they're not making any more of them. People aren't selling what they have, and no more numbers are coming into the country. Trickle, yes, but not in volume. Prices may stabilize for a while, but I would be shocked if they actually did go down. At the end of the day, value is subjective when it comes to collecting. Lee Enfield that you could buy for $10 and a barrel full of them, down at your local Sears back in 1965, wasn't worth $10 in material and quality of construction. And yes, you can buy rifles today for half the price of a Lee Enfield that outshoots that rifle easily. The difference in price, though, is how you value the intrinsic value of history attached to the Lee Enfield that doesn't exist in the Savage Axis XP that comes with a scope that you can buy for less than that. So are the days of cheap and easy milsurp collecting over? As much as I didn't want to agree, I think they probably are. I don't foresee the various factors that are combining to raise prices changing anytime soon. Yes, there are deals to be had out there, but they do seem to be harder and harder to find all the time. Eventually, even those overlooked firearms are going to become hen's teeth as well and command higher prices. So if you're just getting into milsurp collecting today, you're going to be paying more than my generation and the generation before me did, even with inflation factored in. Not what you wanted to hear, but I worked hard to try and disagree, and I couldn't. At any rate, I hope you found this video informative and interesting. If you agreed or disagreed with what I said, please feel free to leave comments below, arguing or agreeing. Share and like the video if you did enjoy it and are so inclined. Below in the description, you can find links to both my Twitter and my Facebook pages. As always, may your shots ring true, and I hope you have a great day.